It was the end of summer. It was time to go back to school. But Matthew was excited because he got to see all of his friends he hadn't seen during the summer. He was hoping that he'd get to see Jackson and Paul and his friend Peter. As soon as he got to school, he went right straight to the playground where all the kids were gathering waiting for the bell to ring. Well, pretty soon he found his friends and everybody was talking about their adventures, all the fun things they had done during the summer. Soon the bell rang. Everybody rushed into the school waiting for the teacher to give them their directions and get that year started. Well, it was going to be a fun year, he could tell. He was in his favorite class, had his favorite teacher, and most of his friends were in his room. Well, the teacher gave the directions for the rest of the day and how the routine would go throughout the year, and then gave them an assignment, and everybody got to work. It wasn't too long after that the teacher announced it was recess time. Now, recess was Matthew's favorite time of the day. They all lined up quietly and headed out to the playground. The girls usually went to the swings and the hopscotch and the jump roping. The boys liked to go out in the field and play baseball and kickball. And so Matthew went out there, but Matthew wasn't very good at sports. He was usually one of the guys who got picked last to be on a team. Well, they all decided to play baseball that day, and Matthew was out in the outfield. Every time the ball came to him, he missed it. And the team would go, "Oh, Matthew." Well, soon it was time to go in. The rest of the day went along fine. When Matthew got home, his mom said, "How'd your day go?" Matthew said, "Well, it was a good day. I got to be in the classroom with most of my friends, and I got my favorite teacher. But the boys were playing baseball, and I'm just no good at baseball." Matthew's mom said, "Well, practice makes perfect." The next day at recess, Matthew went out to play with the boys. And a few of the boys came over and said, "Matthew, maybe you should sit this one out. You know, you're not very good at baseball." So Matthew sat on the sidelines and watched the boys play for a while. Then he decided, "I'm going to go down to the back part of the playground where they have an activity center made of logs and stumps and fun things that boys like to play on." So he went down there and he sat and he thought for a minute. "I know what I'm going to do," he thought. "I'm going to use my imagination and I'm going to pretend like I'm going to the moon." So Matthew stood up on one of the logs, pretended to put on his space suit, got in his spaceship and put his arms out and just ran around those logs pretending he was flying. Pretty soon he jumped off the logs and he reached down and he picked up 3 pebbles. And he said, "Oh, I found some moon rocks." And he put them in his pocket. Well, in the meantime, the boys had gotten a glimpse of what Matthew was doing. What in the world is Matthew doing? They thought he'd gone crazy or something. His arms were out. Then he was shooting up in the sky, bending over, picking up stuff. I don't get it. So when the teacher rang the bell and it was time to go in, when they lined up, the boy said, "Matthew, what were you doing?" He said, "Oh, I just took a trip to the moon." "What?" Just then the teacher said, "Silence, time to go in." The rest of the afternoon went along as normal. When Matthew got home, his mom said, "Matthew, how did your day go today?" He said, "Well, the boys didn't really want me to play baseball with them, so I went down to the playground where the logs and the stumps were, and I pretended I was an astronaut, and I went to the moon." And he pulled the rocks out of his pocket and showed them to his mom. "These are my moon rocks." Mom knew he had an excellent imagination, and this was a good way for him to find something to do at recess. "I love them. You need to show them to the boys tomorrow," she said. Well, the next day, when Matthew went to school, before the bell rang, the boys were asking him more about his trip to the moon. He pulled out the pebbles and he said, "See, I have moon rocks." Well, the boys knew they were just pebbles, but they were curious as to what he did. The bell rang, the kids went inside, went along with their day. Soon it was recess time again. The boys went to the field. Matthew went to the logs. And he decided, today I think I'm going to go to a horse ranch and I'm going to learn to ride a horse and I'm even going to lasso me a cow. So he went down to the field where all the logs were while the boys went to the baseball field. So he got on one of the horses, which was just a log, and it bucked and it threw him off. Well, the boys saw him fall on the ground. Is he hurt? But he got right back up, sat back on that log, and did it again. He got thrown off. The boys' curiosity just got the best of them. We've got to go down and find out what in the world he's doing. They went down to the log activity center, and they stood there and they watched him. Pretty soon, he got back up on that horse, and he stayed on it. And he was riding along. He got his lasso out. He was whirling it in the air. And finally, one of the boys couldn't stand it. He said, Matthew, what are you doing? Matthew said, I'm riding a horse. It's the first time, and I'm not falling off. The next thing I want to do is lasso me a cow. Just then, the teacher blew the whistle. It was time to line up. They went inside. The rest of the day went along fine. When they got home, Matthew's mom said, how did your day go? Matthew said, using my imagination was the best thing ever. Even the boys came down to see what I was doing. Maybe they'll come play with me tomorrow. I think tomorrow we're going to go to Disney World. So Matthew went to school again the next day, and the boys, at recess, the boys didn't even go down to the baseball field. They went straight to the logs. And they said, well, Matthew, where are you going today? Matthew said, I think I'm going to go to Disney World. You want to go? They were kind of reluctant because those boys didn't know how to use their imagination. Matthew said, oh, it's easy to use your imagination. You just close your eyes and you pretend that you're in the place you want to be. So let's pretend we are at Disney World. Well, the boys weren't too sure about that, but they were going to play along. Matthew went over to one of the stumps and he stood there a minute and he pulled something out of his pocket. There was really nothing there. He gave it to a lady who wasn't really there. She gave him tickets. I now have tickets to ride all the rides at Disney World. Well, the boys thought that might be fun, so they pretended to buy their tickets too. He said, well, the first place let's go to the Whirligig. And so they walked around the logs till they came to an empty spot where Matthew pretended it was the Whirligig. And there were about 8 boys with him. And so he asked the lady, he said, ma'am, is there room for 8 of us to get on? She said, yes, sir. Well, there was really nobody there, but the boys were catching on. They said, okay, then let's go. And they all went to the Whirligigs and sat in the little circles there, and off went the ride. And the boys followed Matthew, who was going up and down and twirling around, and they did the very same thing. It got to be so funny. They twirled around so many times they would fall down, and they would laugh and giggle, and they were having the greatest time. Once the ride was over, Matthew turned around to the boys and said, what ride do you want to ride next? Well, by now, the boys had caught on. They were going to go on the roller coaster. Oh, Matthew said, that's one of my favorite things to do. Come on, let's go. And they walked around the logs until they came to another empty spot. They gave the lady their ticket, and on the roller coaster they got. Well, they used the logs to ride the roller coaster. They went up and down and up and down, and they would put their hands in the air and they'd scream, woo! Well, when the ride was over, the teacher rang the bell, and it was time to go in. But everybody had the greatest time. As they were walking to get in line, they said, where are we going tomorrow? Matthew said, only our imagination knows. By that time, the rest of the day went on, and Matthew went home, and Mom said, "How'd your day go?" He said, "Oh, this was the most exciting day I've ever had in my whole life. The boys wanted to play with me. They learned to use their imagination, and we had a wonderful time. Now we have to figure out where we're going tomorrow." Well, day after day, the boys went down and played with Matthew, and they went on some exciting adventures using their imagination. Do you have an imagination? Where are you going to go